Hello there. We're going to talk a little today about nymphing. I'm going to give you some tips to help improve your nymphing game. Now, nymphing, I think, has a bad rap. I love nymphing. I don't do the Euro nymphing. I do the traditional fly rod indicator setup. There's just nothing better, in my opinion, when you see that indicator floating downstream and all of a sudden it disappears. Just takes me back to my youth when I used to bobber fish for crappie in these small lakes with my dad and my brother. So I love nymphing and I've gotten pretty good at it. And I'm going to share some of my tips and tricks that I've used over the years doing nymphs. So we're in the winter time. So I have a deadly wintertime setup. And that, I'm going to try to get my line out here. It's a little tangled. Here's something that can happen just simply trying to get the line out of the end of my rod. Brand new leader, and I've already messed it all up. So I guess my first tip for you when nymphing is be patient. Don't try to rush things because then you just create more work for yourself later. Oh, come on, do I got it? Is it almost there? So one of the deadliest setups that I've used is the TJ hooker fly right here. I don't know if you can see that. Pat's rubber leg works real well. This is tied on a jig leech. It's heavily weighted and just looks fishy. And I have the affectionately known as the San Juan worm. This is kind of a sparkle worm. This is also known, anybody know? Anybody know what this setup is called? Put it down in the comments and see who's right. So next is you got to have an indicator. A couple years ago, I switched to Oros indicator. Why I switched to Oros is they're just a better indicator. They're family owned and operated. It truly is an innovation, which we don't have many in the fly fishing world. No longer will this thing twist or tangle. It goes right down the center of the line. It is so much easier to use than any other indicator on the market. You put the fly line, there's a little groove right in the kind of the little in the little screw portion. That's where the line goes, and you just screw them together and voila. So how do you manage depth? And here's another nice thing, right? So I put it too high, so I'm gonna just loosen it up. I'm gonna pull my line through until I have it right about where I want it. So for me, it's about prospecting when I first get to a hole. This is a nice inside turn. Looks pretty deep. I'm guessing it's probably 5 or 6 feet deep. The current's not too fast on the inside, so things are going to get down and sink pretty quickly. I typically don't use split shot. The only time that I have used split shot is when steelheading, when you got to get that real light egg fly right to the bottom. Sometimes I'll put a piece of split shot on there to help me get down. So I'm about 2.5 feet off the indicator. See my setup down there. And I'm going to start prospecting. Now, one of the things I want to encourage you to do, which is really hard to do, the best part of this water is just right there where the back eddy and the current meet. It's that seam. But I'm going to walk the fly out, right? I want to make sure that I cover all aspects of this hole. I'm going to go in where it dumps in. I know it gets deep right there. And I'm going to throw it right on the edge. I'm going to walk it a little bit further out. And I'm going to walk it into the swift current. I'm going to make sure I walk the fly out to really kind of grid the entire hole to make sure I'm not casting over the fish. So many people don't realize how close fish can be right to you, right up close. So be sure to hit the inside water first and then fish it out. So let's head over there and see if we can catch a fish. There we go. Nice. These red sides are just nuts. Jeez, come on, buddy. Promise I'm gonna put you back. Beautiful fish. That is a pretty fish. One key thing to remember when you're nymphing, it's super important to constantly be varying your depth until you find where the fish are feeding in the water column. Sometimes they're right on the bottom, sometimes they're more towards the middle, and sometimes they're higher up. So you want to experiment, walk the fly out, but experiment in your depths with your indicators too. If you don't get anything for about 15 minutes, change where your indicator is in relation to your flies. You want to shallow things up, bring it towards your flies, and then fish for that for about 10, 15 minutes. If you still don't get anything, the fish are here, right? Put it deeper, see if you can get down. And when you start hooking the bottom, you know you're probably too deep at that point, but you're getting towards the bottom, maybe adjust it by about 6 inches. But you want to constantly be varying your indicator wherever it is you're fishing to try to find the fish and where they might be feeding in the water column. All right, well, I hope that helps you catch more fish the next time you're out nymphing. All right, everybody, till the next time, fish on. Hello there. If you're tired of hitting yourself in the back of the head or all of your line just spaghettis in front of you, I'm going to give you a casting technique that'll solve that. You don't want to false cast. If you don't have to, don't false cast. What you want to do instead is what's called water loading. And what water loading is, essentially, you pick up the fly and you toss it back down. Pick up the fly, toss it back down, pick up the fly, and then toss it back down. And just like that, you can easily make a 50-foot cast without having to do any false casting, which a lot of times, especially if you're new to fly fishing, ends up in a big tangle. So the next time you're out there, try water loading, and I think you'll have a much better time, and it'll erase some of that frustration you're having right now with the cast just stacking up in front of you. All right, everybody, till the next time, fish on. You may also have heard this. You may have also heard this cut. Oh my God. I can't speak. Some of you may have already heard this. Some of you may know this cast as the pickup and lay down cast. Basically the same thing. Hello. Thanks for taking the time to tune in my channel. I know there's a ton of indicators out there, and we all have our preference, but I have to tell you, Oros is remarkably different. It's different in the way that it applies to the line. It's different on your experience. It is better in many ways. First, let's talk about what you're using now. How often have you lost that little black cap? I have to tell you, when I was using those, I was going through more of those caps than I were indicators. Next, how often does that twist up when you're using it, right? And now your leader's kind of all screwed up and you're having to tie on a new leader. Well, this particular indicator answers that question, or solves that problem, I should say. The Oros indicator goes right down the center of the line, and just the pressure of the two spheres screwed together is what keeps it in place. And if you need to move it, you can move it without any type of marks or any type of damage to your fly line. You can move that anywhere up and down the fly line, tighten the two spheres up, and your leader is still perfect, right? So these indicators are better. They're easier to use, right? There's not having to screw on that tiny little cap. There's not having to try to apply anything like you do with the New Zealand style indicators. You don't have to worry about the wool getting wet, right, and drawn underwater, and you're constantly drying that out. These things float great. They're also super lightweight. There is nothing else on the market. Even the company that attempted to copy the Oros indicator is about 30 to 40% heavier, depending on the size of indicator, than Oros. So you get a nice light presentation, but they're super buoyant as well, because we want to use indicators to keep all of our flies up above, right? You don't want that being pulled down under the surface. Oros is super, super buoyant. And really the best reason to support this company is not just because of the performance aspect, which is better than any indicator that I've ever used, but it's because it's a family run and operated company. I'm not saying that right for some reason. I can't say that. Family owned and operated. There you go. Family owned and operated company out of Montana. Patrick innovated this indicator. It's patent pending, and it really is the best indicator out there today. So if you haven't discovered Oros, or haven't used it yet because you're just stuck using that same old indicator that you've been using for years, give Oros a try. I promise you, once you do, you're never gonna look back, right? Even after a conversation I had with Patrick about coming out with a size that steelheaders could use, something really big that keeps those super heavy weighted stoneflies and egg patterns afloat, he designed an oversized indicator. And then when another person gave, hey, I just need something a little bit smaller, he came out with a marshmallow size tiny indicator if you're just doing those single nymph, super delicate presentations and you need something very light. Every base is covered with Oros, and if you haven't seen them, you should take a look and support this family-owned and operated company out of Montana. Hello there. If you clicked on this video, you searched, what flies do I need when I start fly fishing or when I am just fly fishing? Well, I'm going to go over a list today of my top flies. Now, I was there right where you are right now. When you walk into a fly shop, there are so many different flies to choose from. It can be overwhelming. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to boil down my 40 years of fly fishing and thousands of dollars in buying flies to really boil it down to my confidence flies that I know work for trout. All right, so if you have been fly fishing for a while and you have a favorite pattern that always works for you, I'd love to hear what that pattern is. And I'm sure anyone's new to fly fishing that's looking for top patterns would love to see it too. So share your favorite, whether it's a wet, dry, or streamer pattern in the comments, just to help the next guy find the right fly or something that's worked for you. I'm also going to show you or tell you where to buy these flies as well. So let's go over my top patterns, and let's first start below the surface. One fly that you should have in your box is a chironomid. Now, there are a lot of different variations of chironomids. I like to use black, olive, chrome, red, and a myriad of different sizes. But chironomids can be very effective both in lakes and rivers. The next thing you want to have in your box is a slush egg. Now, a slush egg can be very productive during those times that the whitefish are spawning or salmon are spawning and the trout are right behind them eating their eggs. I found the slush egg to be very productive and really mimicking both a salmon egg and a whitefish egg. So you should have that in your box. Next is a San Juan worm. Now, I've used San Juan worms both in pink and red color, both in stillwater fishing and also rivers. Now, try to stay away from the squirmy wormies. And the reason why is because they last about 1 week or 2 fish, depending on how long they've been in your box 1 week, or if you've caught about 1 to 2 fish, they're already destroyed. That rubbery material that they're made out of melts in your fly box after a while. Found that out the hard way. And also, if you get a strike, a lot of times they're just pulling the tail right off. So I like to use ones that are tied with more of a fabric material. And that's just my personal preference. But you do want to have both pink and red worms in your box. So the next underwater fly that you want to have in your box is either the TJ hooker or Pat's rubber leg. They're very similar in how they are tied. The TJ hooker has been kind of my go-to for the past few years. I just like how it fishes. It's tied on a jig hook. The Pat's rubber leg is tied on a standard type hook, but they're basically the same fly. I generally fish the TJ hooker in natural colors, right? Either tan, olive, or black and brown, right? Those have been very productive for me in both the TJ hooker and the Pat's rubber leg. The next nymph that should be in your box, we're still underwater, is a pheasant tail nymph. Now, I prefer the beadhead pheasant tail because it does get down a little bit further, and I should actually say most of these flies that I'm talking about are all beadhead. I like fishing beadhead because it gets down into the water column faster where the fish are feeding instead of just kind of gradually floating down. That's my preference, right? I like the beadhead. But you should have a beadhead pheasant tail in your box as well. The flashback version is also very fishy fly. The next fly is the perdigon. Now, I just started recently fishing the perdigon because I have a friend of mine who swears by them. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to try a perdigon. And a lot of times I fish that just by itself, right? When I know the fish are being very persnickety and I can't really tell what they're eating, a lot of times it's these tiny little nymphs that perdigon will imitate very effectively. So make sure you have some variations of perdigon. And I seemingly, in my box, seems to be all purple, but that works really well for me. All right, now let's go on top of the water. And we're going to talk about some dry patterns that I've been using consistently for decades that have caught a ton of fish and some great big fish to boot. The first one is a chubby Chernobyl. The chubby Chernobyl has a great big fluffy top. And a lot of times you can use that fly as an edible indicator. Some of those other nymphs that we just talked about, you can tie off of the hook shank of the chubby chernobyl and use the chubby chernobyl as an edible indicator as you're fishing that nymph underneath it. It's a great way to look for fish that are either feeding right below the surface, or you might have one that just wants to eat that chubby chernobyl. So a lot of times I'll use the chubby chernobyl as my dry fly, and I'll tie a dropper. If I know the fish are 100% keyed in on dries, I don't usually bother with the dropper, because you will tangle more having a dropper line tied to that dry fly. That's just the inevitability of fly fishing when you're fishing with two flies and trying to cast an entire setup. You are going to get tangled more often. But there are ways that you can cast to mitigate that, one of which is the pick up and lay down cast or water loading. But you want to have chubby chernobyls in your box because they mimic both hoppers, big giant terrestrials, whether it's salmon flies or stone flies. These things can mimic a lot of different things. I have a variation of different sizes and colors. Purple seems to always be my go-to and what I generally catch fish off of, but there are a lot of colors you can choose from. Super visible too. I love seeing the fly out there, no matter how far I've cast or no matter how turbulent the water is. The chubby chernobyl always seems to stay afloat. Now the next fly that needs to be in your box is the Chernobyl ant. And there's two variations. One doesn't have a parachute and one does. The one with the parachute is just a little bit easier to see. The one without a parachute does sink down into the water surface right there, that film on top, a little bit deeper. And sometimes it can mimic a bug just about ready to sink. And sometimes the fish likes that. So definitely have Chernobyl ants in your box and the parachute version as well. All right, I got 4 more flies to talk about on top. The parachute Adams. The parachute Adams can mimic a lot of different flies, whether it's caddis flying around, whether it's mayflies flying around. The parachute Adams really is a great all-purpose dry flies. Definitely have that in your box. The next, you'll hear people refer to this as a BWO. That is a blue wing olive. A lot of times when the fish are taking these tiny little flies, they may look like midges, sometimes you can't see them at all, they're taking a blue wing olive. It's super important to have that fly in your box because very often and all times of the year, you get a blue wing olive hatch and you want to be able to have that fly in your box. They are tough to see. Tough to see. You kind of have to guess where your fly is, watch the fish come up, and remember, hook sets are free, right? If you think it might have eaten your fly, just set the hook. The next fly in my box is a gray wolf. I've had a lot of luck with this particular fly. And again, it's one of those kind of stimulator patterns. I don't think that necessarily tied to mimic something in nature, really. It's just more of a stimulator bug. It can kind of look like a big caddis, it can kind of look like a big mayfly, but I've had a lot of luck using the gray wolf. So I want you to have that in your box because I've caught a ton of fish on the gray wolf fly. Now, in between where the bugs are underwater and bugs on top of the water, there is an emerger stage. And I found that emerger pattern, I don't really get into the weeds when it comes to a caddis emerger or a mayfly emerger or a trico emerger or a hexagena emerger. I just kind of went with a parachute emerger that is size appropriate, right? If you can see these bugs that are just sitting basically trapped in that top layer, that top film of the water, I've tried to match the size. It's not really about the species, it's more about the size. And that has served me well over the years of fly fishing, right? Not trying to get specific to the exact bug that's hatching, but something close in size and you're gonna catch fish. So a lot of times I'll use the parachute emerger in different sizes and it can mimic all sorts of different bugs that are in that in-between stage where they're cracking out of their shells from being underwater and about ready to fly away. So be sure to have emerger patterns in your box as well. All right, so let's go back underwater. Now, one of my favorite things to fish on a fly rod are streamers, because a lot of the other bugs that we talked about before, there is a level of presentation that you have to have, right? A lot of times when you're nymph fishing with indicators, you want to have a drag-free drift. Not that the fish care if the nymph is moving, but a lot of times the drag lifts the nymphs off of the bottom and it's not where the fish are feeding. So it's important to be able to manage these bugs when you're fishing those type of bugs. And when you're dry fly fishing as well, sometimes they'll take them skating across the water, but often they just kind of like a little twitch, right? So there's some work and some skill involved in presenting those flies the right way so that the fish will eat them. Well, with streamers, there's not much of a presentation, right? It's throwing this big old piece of meat out there and stripping it back in different ways as fast as you can, slow, finger rolling to mad stripping to jig stripping, all sorts of different things to get these fish to bite. But really it's about putting action on that streamer. And these streamer patterns have worked for me, whether it's in lakes, rivers, brown trout, rainbow, cutthroat trout, lahotans, giant fish, the works, right? These flies really work. All right, so what streamer patterns are my top streamer patterns? My top streamer patterns, and if you've been watching me a while, it comes as no surprise that it's a Sculptzilla, right? I use Sculptzillas in olive, white, black, and yellow. Those are my top 4 colors of Sculptzillas. They have larger size and smaller size Sculptzillas as well. I've got both of those in my box. That is really just a great all-purpose fly. It mimics baitfish, sculpins, pretty much any small version of fish that these predatory trout will want to eat. Sculptzilla just does an amazing job. And the one thing I really like about Sculptzilla is the hook is located at the back of the fly. A lot of times fish will blast that thing from the side or just hit it, and a lot of times they'll just pick up feather if you don't have a hook back there. The Sculptzilla having that trailing hook really does increase your hookup percentage when using this particular fly. I swear by the Sculptzilla, I've caught a ton of fish on it. So that is my #1 streamer fly that's in my box. The next is a sparkle minnow. I've had a lot of luck with sparkle minnows, and I encourage you to have that particular fly. Sometimes when flashy is better and a lot of shine is better, I tie on a sparkle minnow. All right, so the next and very common fly that's out there, streamer pattern, is a woolly bugger. I encourage you to have woolly buggers in your box, and these can be either weighted with a bead head or not. I have caught some tremendously large trout on a non-weighted woolly bugger. That little streamer that's swimming through, that little bait fish that's swimming right underneath the surface of the water, sometimes they're irresistible to trout. And I've caught some whoppers using the woolly bugger. That's been around and probably one of the most popular flies out there. Streamer patterns, definitely want to have those in your box. And again, it's in natural colors. I prefer olive, brown, white, black, and it's about, and sometimes kind of an olive rust color, but I do like the natural colors for the woolly buggers. All right, the next fly you need to have, and this actually was invented by a guy locally here in Washington State, in Spokane, I believe, is the balanced leech. The balanced leech, I don't know what it is about that fly. I think it's the way that it moves through the water column, because it is balanced, right? The eye of the hook is located right in the bottom middle of the fly. So the fly kind of is pulled sideways through the water. And that different action sometimes it just gets the fish's attention. I've caught a ton of fish and some really great fish, both in lakes, small creeks, big rivers, on the balanced leech. And again, it's natural colors, the olive, the black. I like sometimes black with a little bit of crystal flash in there, white, just kind of the natural colors. Yeah, have a few colors to choose from in your box. I've got in my notes right here so I don't forget any. All right, so the next streamer that's always served me well is the yummy yellow. I don't know why it works so well. Maybe it just pisses the fish off, but the yummy yellow, it doesn't look like anything in nature, right? It's great big yellow legs, maybe a crayfish, crawfish, crayfish, maybe that. I don't know what it mimics, but it's very effective. So make sure you have some yummy yellows. And again, I like to use the weighted version. And finally, the mini dungeon. Now, I have been using the mini dungeon specifically for brown trout, and I usually use yellow. For whatever reason, the yellow just work really well. And sometimes you'll pick up a really big rainbow using that fly as well. But the mini dungeon weighted has really been an effective fly for me when I just need maybe a little more action and a little more substance, right? They can get pretty large in size, and sometimes that's what the fish are targeting, right? A bigger fly. I don't generally use the really big dungeons, but the mini dungeon is the perfect size. And again, the hook located towards the rear of the fly, which helps with your hookup percentage. All right, so the next fly are jig leeches. I've been using jig leeches now for a little bit over a decade, and they can be super effective. What's crazy is some of the smallest jig leeches can catch some of the biggest fish. I had this particular fly in a very popular lake down south, and I caught the biggest cutthroat that I've ever caught in my life using an olive little jig leech. It's pretty incredible how fishy this fly is. I've also used it on small creeks and caught some tremendous trout using this particular fly, especially casting it upstream and stripping it back really fast. The jig leeches, just the action and the profile gets the fish's attention. So be sure to have that in your box. Okay, so now where do you find these flies? I'm gonna give you 3 places to look, right? And this is just where I've personally got the best service and found the best price and the most quality flies, right? All flies are not created equal. Try to stay away from the ultra discount shops because those things fall apart quickly, and there's nothing worse than having a couple of these flies in your box and they start working and they're falling apart. So these 3 places have always provided a very quality, a great fly. The first is your local fly shop. My local fly shop is a Puget Sound Fly Company. And Matt stocks some great patterns that can be found right around here in Washington State. A lot of the popular patterns, both with steelhead and in trout. So check out your local fly shop, and a lot of times they can point you in the right direction. The next is an online family-owned retailer, Red's Flies, and it's REDDS Flies. I happen to be sponsored by Red's. I like supporting family-owned companies wherever I can. Most of my flies today are from Red's. I found them to be durable, they look good, they fish well, and they hold up, right? Even to the big fish, I'm not getting any type of straightening that's happening with the hooks. These are solid flies, and there is a ton to choose from on his website. And again, you're supporting a family-owned company out of Atlanta, Georgia. And then finally, this, if you're near this particular place, you can stop by, and it's Red's Flies with 1D, R-E-D-S. They're in the valley or in the canyon of the Yakima River Valley, but they have a great online presence as well. I have found a lot of the patterns that I can't find either in my home shop or on Red's Flies at Red's Fly Shop. They have a lot of those popular patterns in stock and they can ship to you, and a lot of times it's free shipping. So check out Red's Flies in the canyon of Yakima, and they have got a great online presence. And if you're ever in the area, you need to stop by. It's a great shop, and there's a restaurant attached to the shop that has probably one of the best burgers in Eastern Washington, hands down. But those are my confidence flies. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. All right, everybody, till the next time, fish on. Hello there. Thanks for taking the time to click on this video. And if you clicked on this video, you've picked up fly fishing and you might be having a hard time getting the fly out at any distance. And I totally get that. I was there right where you are many years ago, but it took me some time and some practice, and eventually you'll just start feeling it, right? We're gonna go over some basics, but I'm also gonna give you a couple of tips that are really gonna help that fly cast out. So first, the basics, right? First thing you wanna do is you wanna get a full length of line beyond the tip of the fly rod. So you can see right here, this is where you want to start, right? Have a full length of floating line out from the tip. It's very difficult to try to cast just the tapered leader. In fact, almost impossible. Now, my target, right? I want to be able to cast this thing 25 to 30 feet. And that's really all the further that you have to cast this fly rod or this fly out to be able to catch fish. You don't have to bomb it out there super far. So I don't want you to worry about that. All right, so first thing you want to do, peel some line out, right? Get enough line out to where you think you're right about at the 25-foot mark. And now, there's something that a lot of new fly fishers do. I did myself, right? First thing I want to do is I just feel like, okay, I'm fly fishing, so I got to just keep waving my rod back and forth. No, you don't want to do that. You want to be deliberate in your cast, intentional, but it's really about slowing things down, right? You don't have to do a lot of speed. Doesn't have to be a ton of speed in the fly rod to be able to get the fly line out. So another basic thing I want you to quickly watch, right? Because in the very beginning, I did the same exact thing. Slow things down. Be intentional, but slow things down. So watch how I let my fly line fully extend out behind me before I even attempt to bring the fly cast forward. You need to be able to load the fly rod, and that happens by letting that line go clear back behind you. And it's okay. Look behind you in the beginning. Watch it. Pretty soon it'll become natural. You'll feel it, but watch it go back before you bring it forward. But watch how little effort, right? It's intentional, but I'm not putting a ton of effort into getting this line out. See that? Not a ton of effort, and I cast that fly a long ways. And I was doing that earlier in the boat today as well. It's intentional, but not a ton of power, if that makes sense, right? It's not speed, it's not power. It's this fluid motion. Now, another tip that I want to give you is when you're ready to pick the fly up in your next cast, there's two important things you need to consider. First is you don't want to have any slack. Try to have as straight a line to your fly, right? If you've got some spaghetti happening, that's slack. It's going to be tough if you try to pick that up and cast. Make sure the line is fully straight, right? No slack. And a lot of times, if I'm getting ready to move my fly, as soon as the fly starts to move, I know that I have no slack. But watch my non-casting hand. This is really important. You're going to notice I'm going to help this out by pulling down on the line while picking it up. That helps load the rod and assure that you don't have any slack built up in your line. And pretty soon this will become natural, but watch my non-casting hand when I go to pick it up. And right there, one false cast and the rest went out because I loaded the rod. I preloaded the rod nice and easy with my non-casting hand. Watch, I'll do it again. So my fly is tight out there. My fly's starting to move. Now watch my non-casting hand. A lot of people call that a single haul. Essentially, you're single hauling when you pull down on the fly line while bringing up the fly rod at the very same time. And it'll become natural, right? I want you to be patient with this. It's going to take you some time. So don't get frustrated in the very beginning. And again, remember, it's not about distance, right? It's just about presenting the fly out far enough to where you might interest a fish. You don't need to cast it 60 feet to do that. So be super patient. Now, I also want to watch my cadence, right? So I'm going to do a little false casting here so you can kind of see my cadence. It's like a grandfather clock, and you'll notice nothing is rushed, right? It's intentional. I keep saying that because you do want to put a little power in there, but not so much power that you're overpowering the rod. You do want to have quickness, but not necessarily speed. Just kind of watch my cadence. And I'll turn around so you can see this side here. All right, I'm gonna try not to catch the brush behind me. But just watch my cadence. Look how easy that is, right? I'm not going bonkers here trying to get this thing out. It's a nice, easy cadence, waiting for the line to fully extend out behind me before making the presentation. So you can see during that false casting, now you don't have to false cast that much when you're fishing. Typically once or twice is all you need. But notice how just kind of calm and how patient that cast is. It's not like this. It's just nice and easy. And trust me, I did that too, right? I thought fly casting was all about false casting. It's not. This fly is ready to be delivered. So now I'm going to do what I would call a typical cast, right? I see a fish rising out here. You're going to notice that I might false cast once, maybe twice to get out there. New fly casters, me included, continue to false cast, but yet the fly, when you're finally done, goes right exactly where it would have been after your first false cast. So I want you to resist doing that when you first start out. Just give it one nice false cast and then deliver the fly. And just like that, I cast, a good, I don't know, it's probably 35 feet. Again, watch my left hand, right? The fly's just starting to move. And I'm gonna pull down on the line and lift the rod at the same time. It's really that easy. And if you give yourself the patience, right, and just feel the cast, right? It's not about rushing it. Again, I'm gonna pull out a little more line here. I'm gonna show you that you can even do this. You can do this technique. You can do this technique and still get a ton of line out there, and you're not putting a ton of effort into it. It's all about that haul, getting a tight line, not having any slack, waiting for it to extend out behind you, and then delivering the fly. So there we go. That's about a 50-foot cast. Do the same thing. Fly's starting to move. I pick it up. And just like that, I cast all my fly line, and that was probably about a 65, 70-foot cast. And again, you don't have to cast that far. Just for purposes of this tutorial, I want to show you just how easy it is to get a lot of line out once you get the technique down. Hello there. In today's video, I'm going to teach you how to do the basic roll cast. Now, in big open spaces like this, you generally don't need it. It's when you have a bunch of stuff behind you is when you need to perfect the roll cast. Now, you're not going to be able to get it out there as far as you can cast overhand, but you can still roll cast 30 to 40 feet, probably is the maximum amount. Unless you're a spay guy, then you're going to probably roll cast that thing 80 feet. But this is for overhand, single hand rods. All right, so there is a technique. Now, when you roll cast, you do have to roll out enough line to where you have an anchor line that's in the water in front of you. And that's not the tapered leader, that's actually the fly line itself. You need to be able to have that anchor line out there because when you raise your rod up and create that D-loop you see with the line there and push it forward, you need to have that anchor to be able to help launch all the fly out there. So sometimes when you're roll casting, you're trying to get some line in the water to get ready to execute the roll cast. So essentially what you do is when you have established your anchor, bring your fly rod at about 1 o'clock. You see the fly line, how it's kind of creating this D loop behind my fly rod? You can kind of see it like that. That's when you're ready to go. And in one fell swoop, I'm gonna push my arm out and snap my wrist forward. So watch. Let me get my anchor line out. I'm in a river, so my fly is stuck. Now I'm gonna make the D loop 1 o'clock. And just like that, I roll cast probably, I don't know, 30 feet or so. That's not great. Let me switch sides here. Sorry if you're getting dizzy. All right, so now you can see my casting arm. So I'm gonna do the roll cast. Like that. And my line went out there about 20 feet, real easy. I got about maybe 30 feet of line out. So I got my anchor out in the water, make the D-loop, or make the, D-loop with the fly rod, and then I'm gonna push out, snap my wrist forward. Just like that. So try that next time, making sure you have an anchor line in the water. That is key, otherwise there's nothing to load the rod to create the cast. So rod at 1 o'clock, you're creating a nice D-loop, push out your arms, snap your wrist, just like that. Here we go. Boom. Just like that, it went out a long way. So try that next time. And again, that technique, right? You can just snap your wrist and do a little bit of a roll cast. But really what emphasizes the roll cast is pushing your arm out and then snapping your wrist forward. So it's all like in one great big motion. So try that next time. You should finish like this, and you're gonna find that, wow, all of a sudden your line's just gonna fly out there. All right, well, I hope that helps you the next time you're out fly fishing. Well, hello there. If you clicked on this video, you wanna learn a little bit more about streamer fishing. And today, that's what we're gonna do today. So we're gonna talk about the rod, the line, the tapered leader, tippet, the streamer itself, and some techniques. So the first thing you want to have, some of you that have been following me for a while have seen me use a 3-weight and streamers. Now, because I've been fishing a long time, I can get that done with a 3-weight, but I'm not recommending it if you're just starting out because it's going to be pretty frustrating trying to huck a big streamer out with a super light setup like that. If you've been fishing for a while, for several years, that might be easier. But for now, if you're just starting, start with at least a 5-weight or a 6-weight if you're doing streamers. The tapered leaders, right? I won't go any lighter than 3X. In fact, this right here is a 2X. It's almost 11-pound test. These fish aren't leader shy, right? If they're going after this great big streamer, they're not gonna give a crap if they see a little bit of line. Now, to mitigate that, you can use fluorocarbon, which I use here. Fluorocarbon's a little stronger, it sinks faster, it's more abrasive resistant, and it's a little more invisible in the water versus nylon or monofilament. So I like to use fluorocarbon when I'm fishing streamers. If you got a sink tip, your leader only needs to be about 4 feet long. So a lot of times you can just use a straight piece of 2X or 1X tippet. If you're fishing floating line in a river like this, you're gonna wanna use a 9-foot tapered leader. And that's what I'm using right now. The knot is important. You can see here, this knot, I tied a Duncan loop, right? This Duncan loop just gives the fly a little more action when it's underwater, right? If it's a clinch knot that's tied to this thing, it's gonna have some action because of the marabou, but it'll have limited because it's a straight line contact to a pretty stiff line. So I would encourage you to tie some sort of loop knot to your streamer pattern. It just gives it that little bit more action. Now, there's a lot of ways to fish streamers. First is you can swing them. You can cast it downstream and bring it back in. You can cast it upstream, which is very effective, and bring it back in. There's really no science when it comes to streamers. You just want that thing to have a lot of action. I'll vary up my retrieve. Sometimes it's slow, and I'm kind of let the marabou float around, waiting for the fish to take it. Sometimes I'm just speeding it downstream. We're speeding it across because that elicits a little trigger in the fish's head, and they're like, I gotta get that. So vary up your presentation until you find something that works. Sometimes you'll fish a hole and swing it, and then go back and do an upstream cast and race the fly down, which gets the fish's attention, and they go and grab it. So be sure to do a lot of different things. There's something called banging banks, where you just throw the streamer out. It just lands hard on the water, right against the shore, and you race it back out towards you. Fish just love that. That splash is not gonna scare them. It's gonna get their attention, especially when they're going after these big streamer patterns. Some of the patterns that I like using, I'm a big fan of the Sculptzilla. It's my confidence fly. I'm sure there's other streamers out there that work really well. The Sculptzilla for me, it's nicely weighted. It's got a ton of marabou. It's got some crystal flash kind of in the body. It really does do a great job. And I use that both in white, olive, tan, gray, black. I love this one. The other one is the Mini Dungeon. And the Mini Dungeon in yellow just seemingly works really well for brown trout. Where can you find these flies? I am sponsored by Red's Flies. Check out Red's Flies. They are a family-owned and operated company. This guy makes some quality flies. They don't fall apart. You can just tell when you're tying them on, when you're screwing around with a fly, there's not feathers falling off, there's not fur falling off. These things really are built well, and they're built to last, and they're super fishy. And because you heard it from me, I've got a coupon code right here that'll save you some money if you want to buy some of these flies yourself and support a family-owned company with Red's Flies. So I encourage you to get out there and try streamer fishing. Dry flies are fun. Nymphing, it's fun. I enjoy it. Not a lot of people enjoy nymphing. I enjoy it. Euro nymphing, I don't do it much, but I'm sure that's a lot of fun. But streamer fishing, holy smokes. The power and just the sheer strike of the fish, that when they just blast it, I mean, your adrenaline just goes from 0 to 100 when you get a fish that blasts this thing, especially if it stays connected. Oh, and one thing I should mention as well is you're gonna miss a lot of fish on streamers. A lot of times they're hitting it from the side, they're attacking it from the front, and they don't always hook up. You're not doing anything wrong, right? Unless you're trout setting, try to strip set as much as you can and then get it on the rod. But you're gonna miss, no matter if you're doing everything right, you're still gonna miss probably 50% of the strikes. That is normal when it comes to streamer fishing. But the cool thing about streamer fishing, a lot of the times the fish will give you 2 to 3 chances throwing that fly back at them, and they'll come up and blast it. So you're not doing anything wrong. But get out there and try it. I think you'll like it. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. And until the next time, fish on. And I'm gonna go see if I can catch one right here. Oh, there we go. That's a good fish. Oh, big, big fish. Get in the net. Yeah. Oh my God. Look at that fish. Oh. Wow. That is a beautiful fish. Wow. Beaut. Whew. Hello there. Thanks Thanks for taking the time to click on this video. And if you clicked on this video, you want to start fishing your most favorite river in your state and you're wondering, where do I find the trout? Now I'm going to give you some pointers on how to do just that. Right, you do want to pay attention and kind of think like a fish. Where would I want to be if I was a fish in the river? A, you want to be in and around structure. One of the biggest areas that fish love to congregate is in and around structure, whether it's a big log, a giant rock, a brushy overhang, things like that. Trout will hang out in those areas because they feel safe from predators. So if you see any type of structure underwater or against the bank, target those areas, and a lot of times there'll be a fish sitting right next to that structure. Next, fish don't want to exude a lot of energy. One of the cool things about fishing a really rocky river like this is those pockets that are behind those rocks and sometimes in front, the pillows. Fish will hang around those areas because it doesn't take a lot of effort to stay next to the bottom because that rock is deflecting the current. Often you will find fish hiding behind rocks, right up against the rocks, and also you can kind of look at the rock and you'll see a tail out that happens well behind the rock. That is really easy current for the fish to swim in, so they'll be a lot of times several feet behind that rock as well. Great example right over my shoulder. There is shallow water that dives into a deeper pool. It's like a plunge pool. Fish will hang out right at the edge of that plunge pool. So often I'll throw my nymph setup above it and let it fall off the edge, and the fish will be right there picking them off. Again, they're kind of behind and below that ridge because the faster current is going above their heads. They're down in much easier swimming currents. So you'll find fish in these type of settings. Anytime that you can see a coloration of the river go from where you can see the bottom into a deep green or a deep emerald, that's a plunge pool. A lot of times you'll find fish hanging out right at the edge of that plunge pool. Next is if you have a rushing water that flows into a section of river and then slows down and kind of as tails out. That is great holding water for trout. And that could be really good nymphing water as well. So you'll want to target those areas. Sometimes I'll go right where the fast current flows in and fish that inside seam, right between the transition of the slow current and fast current. A lot of times the fish will be hanging out right there. And further down into the tail out, it just gets better and better as the water slows down. Again, remember, trout don't want to spend a lot of time swimming. They want things easy, right? They don't want to expend a ton of energy. So be looking in those areas for trout. Now during the summer and dry fly hatches, tough to get to, but trout will be hanging out under trees. And the reason why they're hanging out under trees is because they're waiting for bugs to fall off the branches and into the water. And that's where you're going to need to learn the bow and arrow cast. It's a great cast to learn, especially if you're fishing off the shore and need to bring a fly underneath the tree. There are some very large trout underneath those trees waiting for things to fall down. So underneath structure on rivers, especially trees, can be very productive for catching trout. Now, trout can be anywhere in a river, right? But there are certain areas that they like to congregate, so I would always target those areas. I love seeing rocky bottoms, right? If you have a real smooth bottom with a lot of small rocks, chances are you're not going to have a trout holding there because there just isn't enough protection. They don't feel very safe just sitting on a flat rocky bottom like that. So if you have bigger rocks underneath there, that's a great place. I caught a steelhead last year. There was an embankment, a ton of rocks and jagged rocks on the edge of that embankment, and almost like a trough that was deeper than any other part of the river, and then it tailed up shallow to where I was standing. So I threw my egg fly right in that trough, and sure enough, I caught a beautiful steelhead on an egg fly because I just knew there had to have been a fish sitting in that area. So be sure to target those areas. And remember, there's a key thing to remember when fishing for trout, is don't bomb it out to that spot that looks really good across the river. Walk the fly out. I can't tell you how many times in the past I walked up and just almost stepped on a fish because they were right by my feet. So I got to remind myself too, when I go river fishing, walk the fly out, starting close, fish that nice seam that's in close and slower water, and slowly work your fly out to make sure you cover all bases. A lot of times that fish is right up close. All right, everybody. Well, hope that helps you the next time you're out there fly fishing. All right, so kind of slowed down on the balance leech. So I've got a a jig leech, purple one, and a chironomid. Let's see if maybe I can throw it off the edge here. See what I might be able to find. And one of the things I want to encourage you to do is, get it out there a little ways. When I'm casting a big setup like this too, I do the water loading, pick up and lay down cast, but you can kind of see my indicator out there. I'm going to let everything sink to the bottom, right? I've got probably 9 feet of fly line below that indicator. It's about the length of my fly rod. So I'm going to make sure everything is sunk down, right? I'm going to give it, solid, I don't know, probably 10, 15 seconds. And now you can just let it sit there. But the reality is you're going to have a far greater chance of catching fish if you start moving your setup very slowly in your direction, right? Because you're covering more water, right? If it just sits there in one place, you've got to wait for a fish to swim by and see your setup and eat it, right? If you're doing a little bit of finger roll back and it's very slight, can you see just how subtle I'm moving very, very slowly? For one, it gives a little bit of action to the flies below, and sometimes that, elicits a strike. Fish just can't, they think it's getting away, it's moving, right? It looks more natural, but it's very, very slow, and you're also covering more water, right? So I'm going to bring that all the way back in so you can see that works, right? So I just gave that just a little bit of movement. Whoa. And long release there, using barbless hooks. Sometimes that happens. But the lesson there, right, is I gave that fly a little bit of movement when using an indicator, and I'm doing some lake fishing here, so it's still water. And I got a fish to eat it, right, just because I gave it a little action. So try that the next time you're out there fly fishing. So there's your fly fishing pro tip of the trip. All right, everybody, till the next time, fish on.